Good afternoon, friends. I want to talk to you today about Mark chapter 7, and this is a very controversial chapter. But as we look at it, I wanted to make it very, very clear that there's just two camps in which people land in this. As through my years of study of this chapter, most people land on, again, one side or the other. They'll say that Jesus cleansed all foods, or he did not. And just as passionately on both sides, people will have reasons why or why not. But let's take a look for ourselves and come to our own understanding, and you do the same, and I'll let you know at the end how I feel. So let's look at verse 5 to start with, and it says, "Then the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, saying, 'Why don't your disciples do what we do?'" They had a ceremonial washing. They would wash up continuously and make sure that they improved upon Torah by tradition. Remember, the Jews were under Torah, which is the first 5 books of our Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And that includes 613 civil, moral, ecclesiastical, and ceremonial laws. And those laws were to be adhered by the Jews. Remember, Torah was a combination of all these laws put into one place and put into the Ark of the Covenant, in and on the Ark of the Covenant. It included 2 presentations of the 10 Commandments, and very, very clearly, Jesus is speaking to those exact laws and adding to them by their detriment to the Jews. As we look at this carefully, he says again, this is not something we have to do. As we look at verse 13, we don't do this because it is your tradition. You're adding to the law. You're adding to Torah. And again, we don't do that. Our disciples, my disciples, do not do that, Jesus clearly says. And he says, "And when he had called all the people unto them," again, verse 14, he said unto them, "Hearken, listen to me. I have something to tell you, and I want you to understand." He makes it clear, and he says something very controversial, as I say. He says there's nothing outside the body that goes in the body, and he's clearly talking about food, that defiles you. And the Jews are saying, wait a minute, under Torah, if I ate a pig, I'd be defiled. If I ate a lobster, I'd be defiled. If I ate a rabbit, I'd be defiled. And God is telling us very clearly that that's true. He's telling us that is what God told you in his written law. That is what God told you, and it's the disobedience, not the food. Read it for yourself. It's the disobedience to what you were told that makes you defiled. How do we know this? Again, he says in verse 15, "There's nothing from without a man that entered into him that can defile him. But the things which come out of him, those are the things that defile the man." You see, the Jews were told by written ordinance, do not eat these things, as Leviticus 11 says, do not eat them. Now, as we see, we have moved into the new covenant, and all those things in Torah have passed away. We're not under the restrictive kosher diet. But could God still tell us things that we should and should not eat? Of course he can. People may eat too much sugar, and he says, do not do that. And if you did it, you'd be defiling yourself. He says, don't eat pork. You shouldn't. But if he didn't say that to you, there is no restriction. There's no ceremonial restriction that's going to defile you. So whether you're under Torah or not, you could still be defiled. How do I know? Because it's based on disobedience, not the food itself. And Jesus said, again in verse 15, it's not the food. It's the disobedience of what I told you, either written down or to your heart. And it says, by very, very clear, he says in verse 19, because it, the food, just enters into the body. It doesn't go into the heart. It comes out in the draft and goes into the sewer. And again, he says in verse 20, and that which comes out of the man, that defiles you. So again, it's the disobedience. It's not the food itself. When God told, I have to stress this, when he told the Jews that Torah, they were directly under this, that they were told, do not eat the pig. And they went ahead and did it. The disobedience, not the animal, is what defiled them. So if God tells us something today, even though we're not under the kosher restrictive diet, and if he tells us do not do it, whether you should drink or not drink coffee, or whether you should eat or not eat meat, or whatever it may be, if he tells you to do this, you'd be defiling yourself as he spoke to your heart and mind. Again, we in this new covenant are not under a written law. We're under an imprinted law of Jesus on our hearts and mind. And if Christ tells you not to do something, you'd be defiled if you did it, and vice versa. And what are the things that come out of a man? How do I stress and make it clear that it's disobedience, not the food itself, that defiles you? Because he says, here's what comes out of a man. Listen, it's from within. the heart of men that proceeds out of them. And it says these are evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murderers, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, the evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things, these defile the man. So it makes no difference under what covenant you find yourself. The old covenant, the Jews were to listen to the written Torah. And if they did the evil act of eating a pig, they would be defiling themselves. And again, in the new covenant, which we're not under kosher food laws, if we go ahead and eat or do something that we know we're not supposed to do, it says that's evil and we should not do it, and we be defiling ourselves. So wherever you find yourself, you should not defy the law of God that he's imprinted on your heart in this new covenant. Again, it's not the Ten Commandments. Remember, Israel was the only civilization that God had a written law given to the people. We are not under a written law. We're under an imprinted law and guidelines that God has given us in his word and imprinted upon our hearts and minds. How do we know this? Because Romans 2 says that he imprints it upon our conscience to do right and wrong. And when we defy our conscience, we're defiling ourselves. So my friends, don't go back to the old covenant and say, I'm under the kosher food laws, because you're not, because you're in the new covenant. But you're still under a guideline of how God speaks to your heart. Whether you eat, drink, and do all to the glory of God.